Well, welcome to Isaiah chapter 9. This is going to be a fun chapter. So if you remember, the last chapter was pretty doom and gloom against Syria and the northern kingdoms, as Assyria is predicted to come down and just wipe them out. In chapter 9, we're actually going to get some positiveness here. This is a Messianic chapter. So this is a chapter prophesying things about Christ that Isaiah is going to tell us. So if you want to compare in the Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi 19 goes along with this as well. So you can read along because these are the chapters of Isaiah. Even chapter 7 and 8 are also chapters that Nephi put into the Book of Mormon. And so we have some good comparisons to make with them. So now in here, nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee of the nations. So this is continuing still from chapter 8. So chapter 8 kind of ended in doom and gloom, and he says, nevertheless, despite the problems we're going to have here, there is hope, basically. The rabbinical commentators relate this to the attacks by Assyria under Tiglath-Pileser and Sargon II. It's kind of this idea. So it was bad, but not super bad. Now, there's a different translation here for verse 1. Keil and Delitzsch translation of verse 1 shows more clearly what is promised. They translate it, for it does not remain dark where there is now distress. In the first time he brought into disgrace the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and in the last he brings to honor the road by the sea, the other side of Jordan, the circle of the Gentiles. So they added this explanation: the reason assigned for the fact that the unbelieving people of Judah had fallen into night without mourning is that there was a morning coming, whose light, however, would not rise upon the land of Judah first, but upon other parts of the land. The meaning is, there is not, i.e., there will not remain, a state of darkness over the land which is now in a state of distress, but those very districts which God has hitherto caused to suffer deep humiliation, he will bring to honor by and by. The height of the glorification would correspond to the depth of the disgrace. So this is this idea of, even though these areas are facing down terrible destruction by Assyria, there is still hope. There is still a light coming. And this is also, physically that's what's happening then, but spiritually this is talking about Christ. The world is in darkness from sin. Christ will be the spiritual light to help us reveal the sin and overcome it. So verse 2, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. The joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. So you've got more people, but you've got less happiness. That's interesting because there's a little inconsistency in this. Verse 3 is corrected in the Book of Mormon. Basically, the word not is not there. So in verse 3 in here, in the King James Version, it says, thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. But what's really there, when we look in the Book of Mormon, it doesn't have the word not. So in the Book of Mormon, which is an older translation of Isaiah than what we have in the Old Testament, it says, thou hast multiplied the nation and increased the joy. They joy before thee according to the joy in harvest, and as men rejoice when they divide the spoil. So it's the joy has increased, basically, as the nation has increased. So verse 4, for thou hast broken the yoke of his burden, and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, as in the day of Midian. So this is giving an example, an idea basically of it. So verse 5, continuing on, for every battle of the warrior is with confused noise, and garments rolled in blood. But this shall be with burning and fuel of fire. So if you've ever been in combat or watched movies about combat, you know it's total chaos, it's total craziness. And he's saying that that's not what we have to go through. So verse 6, this is the light. He says, to talk about burning and fuel of fire. There's going to be this great light, great energy coming to save us. Verse 6, for unto us a child is born, Unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Now, if in your mind you just thought of a song, as I read that, you're like, I've heard that before. And all of a sudden, choir starts singing in your mind. You start hearing this symphony noise. That is Handel's Messiah. That's this. He literally got this. This is Isaiah chapter 9 is where Handel got some of the lyrics to use in his Handel's Messiah. Now, a couple of things that are interesting about verse 6 that I want to talk about real quick. In verse 6, it shows a comma after wonderful, between wonderful and counselor. Now, what's fascinating is that comma is left off in other translations of the Bible. So the King James Version has a comma, but a lot of the other ones don't. So that would mean he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. So that he's not just a counselor, he is the Wonderful Counselor to help us out, which is really kind of a cool idea. Now, President Joseph Fielding Smith wrote this about these titles that Isaiah gives the Savior. He says, Isaiah speaks of Christ as Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. These titles and the sayings that Jesus was the Creator and all things were made by him have proved to be a stumbling block to some who are not well informed. The question arises, how could he, if he had not body and flesh and bones, before he was born of Mary, accomplish these things as a spirit? Jesus had no body of flesh and bones until he was born at Bethlehem. This he fully explains to the brother of Jared. The answer to this question is simply that he did these wonderful works because of the glory his Father had given him before he was born, and because at that time he was God. In an epistle issued by the First Presidency and the Council of the 12 Apostles in 1916, these matters are clearly explained. From this epistle, the following is taken. Quote, Scriptures that refer to God in any way as the Father of the heavens and in the earth are to be understood as signifying that God is the maker, the organizer, the creator of heavens and earth. With this meaning, as the context shows in every case, Jehovah, who is Jesus Christ, the Son of Elohim, is called the Father, and even the very eternal Father of heaven and earth. With analogous meaning, Jesus Christ is called the Everlasting Father. The descriptive titles everlasting and eternal in the foregoing text are synonymous. That Jesus Christ, who we also know as Jehovah, was the executive of the Father, Elohim, in the work of creation is set forth in the book of Jesus the Christ, chapter 4. Jesus Christ, being the Creator, is constantly called the Father of heaven and earth in the sense explained above. And since his creations are of eternal quality, he is very properly called the eternal Father of heaven and earth. That's from the Church History and Modern Revelation. So some great things we get to learn in there. Now, President J. Reuben Clark discussed this as well. He said, heralded centuries before his birth as the Prince of Peace, heavenly angels announced his coming. Modern man sometimes vainly thinks that Jesus' mission was to wipe out war, and scoffers have cried that since war still curses the earth, Christ's mission has failed and Christianity is a blight. Yet Christ himself sent forth his 12, saying, Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace but a sword. That's Matthew 10:34. So Christ did proclaim a peace, the peace of everlasting righteousness, which is the eternal and mortal enemy of sin. Between righteousness and sin, in whatever form, there can only be unceasing war, whether in one man among the people or between nations and in armed conflict. This war is the sword of Christ. Whatever is from this war cannot end. Whatever its form, this war cannot end until sin is crushed, and Christ brings all flesh under his dominion. Righteousness is peace wherever it abides. Sin in itself is war wherever it is found. That was from a 1939 conference report. So some great things we get to learn about the Savior from this, how great this is, that we get to see this. In verse 7 too, like we read, that the government, he'll be the head of the government, he'll rule everything. Now verse 8, the Lord sent a word into Jacob and it hath lighted upon Israel. And all the people shall know, even Ephraim and the inhabitant of Samaria, this is the northern kingdom, that say in the pride and stoutness of heart, the bricks are fallen down, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them into cedars. So they're saying, we will rebuild after the destruction. Verse 11, therefore the Lord shall set up the adversaries of Rezin against him, and join his enemies together, the Syrians before, and the Philistines behind. They shall devour Israel with open mouth, for all his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. So this is wild to think, even though Israel's like, okay, that was painful and terrible. We'll rebuild. We're going to try to come back. We are strong. We don't necessarily need God all the time. We can do things on our own. We're powerful without God. And he's going, no, you're not, because you're just going to get beat down by everybody else, basically. But as it ends in verse 12, his hand is stretched out still. God's love and mercy is still there for them. He's holding his hand out, waiting for them to grab it. They just have to grab it. That's it. They just have to reach up and grab his hand, and he will help them and take care of them. Verse 13, for the people turneth not unto him that smiteth them, neither do they seek the Lord of hosts. Therefore the Lord will cut off from Israel head and tail, branch and rush in one day. The ancient and honorable, he is the head, which is the older people, and the prophet that teacheth lies, he is the tail. These are false leaders. For the leaders of this people cause them to err, and they that are led of them are destroyed. So the leaders, the government and the religion of the northern kingdom are not following God. And so they have led the people astray, basically. Verse 17, therefore the Lord shall have no joy in their young men, neither shall have mercy on their fatherless and widows. For every one is a hypocrite and an evildoer, and every mouth speaketh folly, for all that his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. So as much as these people are not following God, he still has his hand out of mercy, waiting for them to grab it. That's all they have to do. Turn to him, grab his hand, he'll help them. But they're not, unfortunately. Verse 18, continuing on here, for wickedness burneth as the fire. It shall devour the briars and thorns. Remember, briars and thorns will be what's left over the land. And shall kindle in the thickets of the forest, and they shall mount up like the lifting up of smoke. So this is a wildfire burning. Verse 19, through the wrath of the Lord of hosts is the land darkened, and the people shall be as the fuel of the fire. No man shall spare his brother. So it's going to be crazy what's going on, this destruction that's happening. Verse 20, he shall snatch on the right hand and be hungry, and he shall eat on the left hand, and they shall not be satisfied. They shall eat every man the flesh of his own arm. That's how bad it's gotten, that they're so hungry they're willing to actually eat their own flesh. Verse 21, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Ephraim Manasseh, and they together shall be against Judah. For all this his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. So God is still there. The people have gone abjectly wicked. There's lots of problems, but God's mercy is still there for them, if they choose it. God's not going to make them have mercy. God's not going to make them do good. They have to have their agency to choose that themselves. That is so important for us to understand, that God is always there. His hand is stretched out. It's us that need to take the agency to reach out to him. So always remember that. If you feel alone in life, realize maybe you have moved away from God. Not God away from you. He's still there. But you have to reach out to him. So focus on reaching out to him to help you out. So with that said, I hope you guys are enjoying all these videos. Please like them, subscribe, share the videos out with others to get them to come subscribe. Let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue forward.